Was Jesus a socialist?
Well, the answer is absolutely no. And of course, much depends upon how you define socialism. Some people have a mistaken view that it's just an innocent but strongly held compassion for poor people. Lots of people have that, of all kinds of political and economic views. Socialism is the concentration of power in the hands of the state for the purpose of achieving objectives like the central planning of an economy or government ownership of the means of production or redistribution of wealth. All of that rests upon the use of force. There is not a single passage anywhere in the words of Jesus that suggests he would call in the government and its political power, its use of force, to solve any problem. He never once suggested that the way to fix a problem is to rob Peter to pay Paul or trust...
Literally.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And he knew them both. Or to trust politicians to plan an economy. I mean, that's so alien to his entire message. At the same time, I wouldn't say he was a capitalist either. To limit him to those words that didn't even come into existence for another 1,800 years after the crucifixion is to limit Jesus to but a fraction of who he was. But was he friendly to the ethics and the economics of freedom and free markets? Yeah, I think totally, and very opposed to the ethics and the economics of what we call socialism today.
You've given the conclusion, and now we are gonna walk through it.
Okay.
And the reason I think that's important is multifold. So one is, if you look at polls today, and I know you look at these things, a substantial amount of young people believe that they have a positive view of not just the word socialism, but even communism, which used to be a word that was very much out of favor after the fall of the Soviet Union and all of the other sort of murderous communist societies that we as a species experimented with in the 20th century. Maoist China, Cambodia. We still have North Korea kicking around, starving its people every year. But I think it's over 25% of Gen Z, when asked in these polls if they think communism is a good idea or if they have a positive or negative view, they say positive.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that is about a belief in what those words mean when it comes to, am I being a good person? Am I caring?
Yeah.
Do I care about others? And I think that's one group of people that I think deserves to hear what you've got in your book and what you've spent your life working on. The other group, I think, are people, a lot of whom I think, are watchers of this show, who are deeply devout Christians and who see business and capitalism, they view it with a certain amount of skepticism and say, hey, I want to be a good person. I follow my Christian faith. And I'm being told, including by this Pope, Pope Francis, that business is greedy and markets are bad and sort of immorally corrosive. And so I'm for the values of sort of Christianity, but when you start talking about business and markets, I'm like, no, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I'm deeply skeptical, especially of big business, but maybe of business more broadly. So let's start to break this down for me. Like what, didn't Jesus flip the tables over and, hate on the money changers? I brought you in as a Protestant because as a Catholic, I need you to explain the Bible passages because we don't read it.
That's for another day. But Jesus certainly overturned the tables of the money changers, but he did it at the temple. And that's the house of God. He never drove away the money changers from a bank or from a marketplace. This was not the place to be doing the things that they were doing, and presumably they may even have been disrupting services or at least entry to God's house. But when looking at socialism, I think there's a lot of sympathy for it because people are judging it by its stated intentions, not by its actual results. They're night and day. Because in terms of intentions, socialists often speak of helping the poor, being compassionate, doing good for others, thinking of others instead of yourself. Those things sound appealing to a lot of people. But it all comes down to how are you going to accomplish that? And the fact is that under what we would call capitalism, freedom and free markets, far more gets done for the poor and those who need special attention for various reasons, handicaps or whatever. Far more gets done for them under capitalism than is ever being done under socialism. And Jesus did tell us that we should consider the poor and to do what we can to help them. But if he came back today and asked an audience, okay, what did you do for the poor? I told you to pay attention to them. What did you do? He would not be impressed if you raised your hand and said, well, I just voted for the politicians who said they'd take care of that. He wanted to know, what are you going to do? If you stood up in that audience and said to Jesus that, well, I built a company and I hired lots of people who didn't have such opportunities before. Or if you stood up and said, I invented things that saved lives, lengthened lives, I think he would be immensely proud of you. But he wouldn't be proud if you said, I just foisted the responsibility of the poor onto somebody else.
You define socialism as, essentially state ownership of the means of production, more or less.
Concentration of power, and that's one of the objectives, of course, yes.
The socialist, the self-described socialist, would take exception to that description, at least when it comes to power, and they would say, no, I am for power being centered with working people.
Yeah.
And that it's democracy that gives the power to the people, and that what we need to have is economic democracy. That's what we want. We want the people to be able to decide through their vote, which they all have equally, because one man, one vote, one person, one vote. But I think that is like the ethos and the argument. No, I'm not for. I don't think Bernie Sanders would say that he was for centralized power.
No, but what Bernie Sanders does not understand is that if you, in the name of democratic socialism, go down that path, you'll soon find yourself, at least you'll find the socialist objectives that you have at war with the democratic objectives. Because the more you trust the government to run the economy, to own the means of production, all the things that socialists want the government to do, the more that tends to not only concentrate power, but it leads to corruption. I can think of no more toxic motivator than the desire for power, to push other people around, take their stuff, redistribute it, and then remind people at election time that it was you that gave them something. That's inherently corrupt. We've had many such experiments in so-called democratic socialism. And they all end up the same. I mean, Britain went down that path after World War II. I mean, it retained its democratic political institutions, but followed a socialist economic path. And barely 30 years later, you had Margaret Thatcher coming to power saying, we are the sick man of Europe. We've got to undo some of this. That is a pattern that's been repeated over and over and over again. You have to get rid of the high-sounding intentions and look at actually what a proposed system will do. What does it do? What's its track record? And socialism is a pretty sorry record.
I want to dig into the specifics of why and how that is a lot in this conversation. But before we do, I actually want to come back to the words of Christ. Help me understand how we could have a culture and have like a meme that Jesus was a socialist. That to be Christian is to believe in social justice and equity and all of these things that they all sound nice. They're all beautifully branded. What are the things that people derive from Christ that they misunderstand to be socialistic?
So often, John, I find in talking to people who think that Jesus was sympathetic to socialism, I find they really haven't read much of the Bible. I mean, if they did, they would find, for instance, in the book of Luke, Luke 12:13 through 15, a man approaches Jesus with a request to redistribute wealth. He says, which is a socialist objective. He says, Master, speak to my brother that he divideth the inheritance with me. And Jesus does not respond by saying, oh, you mean you didn't get as much? Oh, we don't have equality here? Let me do something about that. No, he looks at the man and he says, man, who made me a judge or divider over you? Now, I mean, that's powerful. He's basically saying, what? Do you want me to take from some and give to others, or take from some guy, and, your brother, and give to you? I mean, who made me a judge or devoter? And he's the Son of God. I think, too, they're not looking at some of the parables that Jesus told. He told almost 40 parables. 3 are very strongly economic in content, and they make no case for a socialist arrangement of the economy. You have the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Yep.
When a man is walking along a road, he comes across another who's been beaten and robbed and clearly needs help. And what does the man do? He helps him. And we call him the Good Samaritan, not because he said to the man, there must be a government program for you, or I'll put a word in for you with the emperor. But instead, he pitches in with his own resources and of his own free will. He helps the man. He doesn't do anything that's remotely socialistic. He does it himself through his own initiative. That's why he's called the Good Samaritan. He would be known as the good-for-nothing Samaritan if he said, hey, there's got to be a government program for you.
And again, I think you could maybe say, well, it's an ethos of charity, right?
But it was never charity at gunpoint. Jesus never advocated charity by gunpoint. It should come from the heart. He was interested in what's in your heart, not what you are willing to foist onto somebody else as a responsibility. He told the parable of the talents, which I think is even more powerfully anti-socialist. And in this parable, he has an estate owner who's about to leave for a period of time. He gathers 3 of his employees together, gives them each a different quantity of his wealth, and he says, when I come back, we'll see what you've done with it. And Jesus has the estate owner come back and gather the same 3 guys, and he says, the first guy, what'd you do with what I trusted you with? And he says, oh, you'll be happy with me. I'm paraphrasing. I have just what you gave me. I didn't lose anything. And the estate owner criticizes him. He says, what? You didn't do anything with it? You didn't magnify it in any way? Then he goes to the second guy and says, what'd you do? And the guy says, I magnified it by making the right investments, and now I have 4 or 5 times what you trusted me with. He's praised in the parable. The third guy has like 10 times as much. He was even a wiser investor. And Jesus has the estate owner issuing the greatest praise to him. And then going one step further, saying, let's take the money from this first guy, this freeloader who didn't do anything with it, and give it to the third guy because he knows how to magnify wealth. You'd never have a socialist say anything like that.
This just reminds me of this concept, right? That, from each according to his ability to each according to his need.
Mm-hmm.
So that's parable, what you're laying out there in the Bible, that says, no, if you have ability, you should actually be given more resources and responsibility. It's like the exact opposite.
Yeah.
How does that square with the concept of charity or selflessness? That I think is, again, I'm Catholic, so I can't quote the Bible like that, like you can. But I mean,
at least now you can read it.
I can read it. But I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and the couple things that came out of that were, well, God is love.
Uh-huh.
Pretty awesome, pretty simple. And, love your neighbor as yourself, among other things.
Yep.
And I know there is something that Christ does say, right? Which is, how you treat the least of us is you treating me.
Yeah.
When you help another person, you are helping me. That is me that you're helping. And so that is an ethos of charity and of giving.
Yeah.
Not of maximizing return on investment. Right?
Well, quite often in a free economy or capitalist economy, the way to maximize your return is to serve customers, to have an ever-increasing number of people who say, thanks for what you did. You made my life better. I'll buy from you another time. So there's nothing inherently incompatible with the creation and enjoyment of wealth and helping those in need. Jesus did advocate for the charitable impulse, but he never said the way to accomplish it is to employ the politicians to do it instead of you, to do it at gunpoint. It was always a gesture that he encouraged one and everyone to engage in it, but from the heart and with their own resources. He never said anything like, vote for the politicians who will do it and relieve you of that responsibility.
You said there was 3 parables that are especially powerful in this regard. What's the third?
The third is the parable of the workers in the vineyard. And this involves a man who owns apparently a large estate of grapes. It's harvest time. And he gathers a group of workers together early in a day. And he says, if you each go out and work the fields, I'll give you a denarius, which was a Roman coin, at the end of the day. And so they go off to work. And around noontime, the owner realizes he's got to get more people out in the field. So he brings another group together and he says, if you'll work the remainder of the day, I'll give you a denarius. And then finally, with maybe an hour to go before dark, he hires his last group of workers and offers them the same for effectively an hour of work. And then in this parable, Jesus has the estate owner gathering all the workers to be paid. And as you might imagine, the first group is grumbling. They're saying,
Right.
what? We worked all day and we got the same as the guys who showed up for an hour. And here's an opportunity for Jesus to make a socialist point, but he doesn't. What he does is he has the estate owner say to the workers, it's my money. It's my money. And then he goes on to say, didn't I give you what I promised? Didn't I meet the terms of our contract? Of course I did. And get out of here.
Scram.
Yeah. So I think that is a defense by way of a parable of things like private property, because the owner said, this is my money and we agreed to it. You know, it's a defense of the rights to voluntary contract. And I think probably a defense of supply and demand, because presumably at the end of the day, to get some people who may have already put in somewhere else,
Right.
to get them to come out, he had to pay them more. So there's nothing socialistic about that, whatever. It speaks to free enterprise.
If you like this clip, we've got so much more where that came from. So be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss our new videos as they come out each week.